Bitterroot Valley, Montana Territory. November, 1891. The first frost came before the wheat was fully cut. By the second week of November, the valley had already buried 2 calves and 1 elderly widower who had misjudged the cold by a single night. Smoke drifted constantly above the settlement. Every cabin burned pine without pause. Men split wood from dawn to dusk. Women sealed cracks with cloth and mud. Children slept wrapped in coats. Winter had arrived early, and the worst of it had not yet begun. At the eastern edge of the valley, Thomas Brennan was laying stone. Not for a foundation, not for a church, for a fireplace, but not like any fireplace the valley had seen. A reputation for wrong ideas. Thomas was 23 and already carried the quiet burden of being underestimated. He read more than he spoke. He measured before he cut. He asked why in a place that preferred because, when he ordered 8 tons of river sandstone from McCreary's store, the news spread faster than frost. What's he building, a fort? Church tower? Grave marker? Thomas answered plainly. A heat battery. Laughter rolled across the store like a warm wind. Jacob Wheeler did not laugh. He studied Thomas carefully. Wheeler had survived 37 Bitterroot winters. He had buried neighbors who built wrong. He had watched cabins fail because someone tried to be clever. Fireplaces go against outer walls, Wheeler said. Smoke rises straight. Heat fills the room. That is how it's done. Thomas nodded and kept hauling stone. The problem no one solved. Every winter followed the same pattern. Even in strong cabins, fire roared at sunset. By midnight, flames died. By 3 a.m., frost crept inside. Men woke half-frozen to relight the hearth. Wood piles shrank fast. Sleep was broken. Cold found corners no one could seal. Thomas did not believe more wood was the answer. He believed the problem was speed. Fire burned fast. Heat escaped faster. Cabins relied on flame instead of memory. Stone, he believed, could remember, building the core. By early December, a thick column of sandstone stood at the center of his cabin frame. The firebox itself was ordinary in size, but the smoke did not travel straight upward. It wound through narrow stone channels built into the core before reaching the chimney. The path forced heat to linger. The stone absorbed it. Neighbors visited daily. Some mocked. Some predicted suffocation. His brother Daniel warned him the flue would clog. Thomas listened, adjusted, tested small fires before sealing the final stone layers. He built slowly. He built carefully. He built alone. The first test. On December 12th, the temperature dropped below 0 for the first time. Thomas lit an evening fire, 9 logs. He let it burn hot and clean for 2 hours. Then he sealed the draft and went to sleep. Outside, wind scraped across the valley like steel on bone. Inside, warmth lingered. Not blazing, not roaring, steady. At dawn, frost glazed the window edges. The air inside measured 59 degrees. He had not touched the fire since before midnight. Thomas recorded it in a small notebook. He did not mention it to anyone. The valley tightens. By December 24th, real winter settled in. Wood piles across the settlement were already lower than they should have been. Wheeler burned 35 logs in a single day trying to hold 60 degrees inside his own cabin. Even so, the far wall near his pantry froze hard enough to crack a ceramic bowl. Families layered blankets inside. Men stopped removing boots indoors. Sleep grew thin. The cold had begun its slow tightening. January 9, 1892. The cold that arrived that morning did not announce itself with wind. It arrived in silence. The thermometer outside Thomas's door read 32 below 0 before sunrise. Trees snapped in the valley like distant gunfire. Cattle huddled tight enough to share breath. Thomas had not built a fire since 9 p.m. He struck a match. Inside temperature, 61 degrees. His breath did not show. His water bucket had not frozen. The stone core still radiated warmth, not blazing hot, but deeply warm. He added 6 logs. By mid-morning, the cabin reached 72. The stone absorbed the surplus quietly. The visit, Word traveled through McCreary's store before noon. Wheeler came himself this time. He did not remove his coat at first. He stood just inside the doorway, waiting for the cold to find him. Didn't. The fire had been out for hours. The cabin felt like late autumn. Wheeler walked the perimeter walls. 65 degrees near the corners. 68 near the center. He pressed his palm against the sandstone core. Held it there. Then longer. How much wood? He asked. 14 yesterday. 6 this morning. Wheeler swallowed. I burned 42. 11 days of proof. The Arctic air remained for 11 days. Cabins across the valley struggled. Some dropped into the 30s overnight. Men woke to ice inside buckets. Wood piles fell dangerously low. Thomas burned between 12 and 16 logs per day. His cabin never dropped below 57 at dawn. Never rose above 75. The heat did not spike. It did not crash. It stayed. Visitors came daily. Some came to accuse. Some to measure. Some simply to stand in warmth without tending a fire every hour. Thomas kept recording numbers. He did not argue. He did not boast. He let physics speak. Quiet shift. On the 5th visit, Wheeler removed his gloves without hesitation. I was wrong, he said. Cost him something to say it. Thomas nodded once. That stone holds like a living thing, Wheeler added quietly. By late January, 3 men had begun modifying their own hearths, adding stone behind fireboxes, lengthening flue paths, slowing draft. Results were modest but noticeable. Wood use dropped. Temperature swings softened. The valley was paying attention now. Knowledge that wasn't new. In February, a Salish elder visited. He touched the stone and nodded. Through translation, he explained their winter lodges once used heated rock buried beneath earth. Fire must stay, the elder said. Not run. Thomas listened carefully. He adjusted his lower draft control afterward. Even Wheeler noticed the improvement. What Thomas built was not new to the world. It was simply forgotten. Spring thaw. When the cold finally loosened its grip, something had shifted in the Bitterroot Valley. Wood piles were not empty. Families were not exhausted from broken sleep. The winter had been brutal, but it had not broken them. Thomas did not build more cabins. He remained a rancher, but the next cabin Wheeler built placed stone at its center. And the one after that. Within 3 years, half the valley had adopted some variation of the idea. Not because it was fashionable, because it worked. What remained? Thomas lived in that cabin for the rest of his life. Winter after winter, the stone core absorbed flame and released it slowly into darkness. It did not roar. It did not boast. It remembered. And in the Bitterroot Valley, when the wind howls down from Canada and the temperature falls into numbers that frighten cattle and men alike, stone still holds. Not because it is stronger than winter, but because it understands it. But survival was only the first test. The second test was pride. Not everyone in the Bitterroot Valley welcomed change so easily. Some men had built cabins the same way for 30 years. Their fathers had built the same way before them. To admit that a 23-year-old rancher had improved on tradition was not easy. For weeks after the cold broke, debates continued in McCreary's store. Some argued the winter had simply been unusual. Others said Thomas had exaggerated his numbers. A few quietly suggested the system would crack after repeated heating and cooling. Thomas said nothing. Instead, he invited anyone to bring their own thermometers. He encouraged them to measure the stone at different hours of the day. He even allowed Wheeler to sketch the flue path and inspect the draft channels. It was not magic. It was repeatable. And that frightened some men more than the cold ever had. By late February, another cold snap struck the valley. Not as brutal as January, but sharp enough to test weak designs. 3 cabins that had added partial stone backing reported noticeable improvements. One family claimed they had slept through the night for the first time in years. Wheeler began rebuilding his son's future home before spring thaw. This time, the fireplace went at the center. The flue twisted slowly through stone before reaching the roof. He did not tell Thomas until it was finished. When he finally did, he only said, "It works." For Wheeler, that was as close to praise as anyone would ever hear. As months passed, something unexpected happened. Wood demand in the valley decreased. McCreary noticed it first. Families were purchasing less pine for winter stock. Woodcutters found themselves with surplus. Fewer men spent entire days splitting logs in freezing wind. Time returned to them, and with that time came other improvements. Cabins were reinforced better. Roofs were sealed tighter. Livestock shelters were strengthened. The valley was not just warmer. It was less exhausted. In early summer, Thomas was visited by a surveyor traveling through Montana Territory. The man had heard rumors of a stone heat tower that reduced fuel consumption dramatically. He spent an afternoon inside the cabin, taking notes and measurements. Months later, a short mention appeared in a frontier building bulletin printed in Helena. No one in Bitterroot Valley cared much about the publication. But similar designs began appearing quietly in mining camps west of the mountains. Then in Idaho, then Wyoming. No one credited Thomas directly, and he never asked for it. Years passed. Thomas married, raised children, and continued ranching. The stone core never failed. Even during winters when snow buried fence lines and cattle froze standing upright, the cabin held steady. Not blazing hot, but reliable. That was the true gift. Not extreme warmth. Consistency. Near the end of his life, Thomas once told a young neighbor who was building his first cabin, "Fire is impatient. Stone is not. If you want to survive winter, build with something that remembers." By then, the valley had long stopped laughing. What began as a crazy idea had become standard practice. But the real lesson was not about stone. It was about questioning habits that no one remembered choosing. The men who mocked Thomas were not foolish. They were practical. They had survived. But survival and improvement are not the same thing. The cold still comes every year to the Bitterroot Valley. The wind still cuts across the plains, and cabins still stand against it. But some stand quieter. Some hold heat longer. Because one winter in 1892, a rancher's son decided that fire should not race the cold. It should outlast it.